Welcome to the Country Watch Political Intelligence Briefing Quick Hits, a weekly briefing of hot stories across the world in brief. I'm Denise Youngblood Coleman, and I'm the Editor-in-Chief and Senior International Affairs Analyst at Country Watch. This week, the featured country is the United States. In a blockbuster book titled I Alone Can Fix It, veteran Washington, D.C. reporters Kara Leonnig and Phillip Rucker detail Donald Trump's catastrophic final year in office. Their account characterizes Trump's refusal to accept his election loss in November 2020, the genesis of the big lie regarding his losses in key election states, and how that mendacious assertion formed the foundation for the slide towards insurrection, culminating on January 6, 2021, with the unprecedented attack on the United States Capitol. On election night, Trump was feeling optimistic. The numbers in Florida, for example, looked positive for him, but the election in 2020 would not be decided by Florida alone, as had been the case in 2000. With an eye on managing election night expectations, Trump's campaign manager, Bill Stepien, indicated that it would take some time to count all the votes and that patience was in order. Stepien further explained to Trump that the first votes to be recorded in many battleground states, such as Michigan, Wisconsin, and Pennsylvania, would be in-person votes that were favorable to him. But once the mail-in votes were tallied, those would favor Biden. As the reality of those trends began to make their way onto the board and Trump's lead in those key states began to erode, dismal reality started to sink in for many within Trump's inner circle. At his victory party, Trump angrily asked Justin Clark, the deputy campaign manager, why the vote counting was even continuing. In their book, Leonnig and Rucker offer the following citation from Trump. Why are they still counting votes? The election's closed. Are they counting ballots that came in afterward? What the hell is going on? Trump also told his advisor, Kellyanne Conway, that the counting of the votes meant that the election was being stolen from him. In truth, election officials were simply completing the process of counting all ballots, a process that would take time and perhaps even days, as was presaged by analysts prior to Election Day. Finally, after 2 a.m. in the early hours of November 4th, 2020, Trump entered the East Room to the tune of Hail to the Chief. Instead of delivering the remarks as prepared by Stephen Miller and his speechwriting team, Trump instead gave a stream of consciousness address. He called the election a fraud on the American public. He celebrated the states he had won, including Florida, Texas, and Ohio, but then falsely asserted that he had already won North Carolina and Georgia, which had not been called for either candidate at that point. He additionally made the false claim that he was winning Michigan, Wisconsin, and Pennsylvania. These declarations by Trump would serve as the foundation for what would come to be known as the big lie, thus setting in motion a climate of instability and mistrust in United States democratic institutions. Meanwhile, the election tallying process was being watched by two top officials in the United States Pentagon, Defense Secretary Mike Esper and the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, General Mark Milley. In their book, Leonnig and Rucker note how Esper and Milley were quietly rooting on election night for a victory for Biden over Trump, disturbed over what Trump might do. Esper, a loyal, stalwart Republican who had worked within the conservative Washington establishment for years, was worried about Trump's intent to torpedo the United States' relationship with South Korea and to withdraw from NATO. Esper had more confidence in Biden's foreign relations gravitas and seriousness of purpose. In the book by Leonnig and Rucker, Milley emerges as the lone remaining moral center of the Trump White House, the one voice unwilling to succumb to delusion over facts. Not merely the only adult in the room, Milley was also the one person still inhabiting Trump world with a sense of fidelity to the Constitution and a willingness to stand on the right side of history. But Milley was also the metaphoric canary in the coal mine, aware of the desperate means that Trump could succumb to in order to hold on to power. During the final weeks of Trump's presidency, Milley reportedly expressed his anxieties to aides about a possible coup d'etat. Milley believed that Trump was stoking unrest, possibly in hopes of an excuse to invoke the Insurrection Act and call out the military. Leonnig and Rucker write that Milley saw parallels between Trump's rhetoric of election fraud and Adolf Hitler's insistence to his followers at the Nuremberg trials that he was both victim and savior. In a chilling warning, Milley told aides, this is the Reichstag moment. He was, of course, referring to the arson of the German parliament, which Hitler used as an excuse to seize absolute power. With these anxieties in mind, Milley's view was that an undemocratic seizure of power would require the cooperation of the Pentagon, the Federal Bureau of Investigation, and the Central Intelligence Agency. Certainly, Trump had succeeded in installing his allies in these centers of power, but Milley was strategizing behind the scenes to ensure that those agencies would remain loyal to the Constitution. Leonnig and Rucker writes that Milley attempted to soothe the worries of members of Congress, saying, everything's going to be okay. We're going to have a peaceful transfer of power. We're going to land this plane safely. This is America. It's strong. The institutions are bending, but it won't break. Still, that which Milley feared might come to pass occurred on January 6, 2021, when Trump's base marched to the Capitol to end the certification of the presidential election by a joint session of Congress. Heeding his call, Trump supporters stormed the Capitol in an unprecedented act of insurrection and an unparalleled attack on American democracy. It would take security hours to get control of the chaos rocking the legislative center of power in Washington, D.C. Finally, at Biden's inauguration on January 20th, 2021, Milley was seated behind the former Presidents Barack Obama and former First Lady Michelle Obama. The former First Lady reportedly asked the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff how he was feeling. His response, no one has a bigger smile today than I do. You can't see it under my mask, but I do. Staying in the Western Hemisphere, in the week following the assassination of President Jovenel Moise of Haiti, Haitian police announced that they had arrested Christian Emmanuel Sanon, a Haitian national with political objectives who recruited the Colombian mercenaries who killed President Moise. The plan was to remove Moise from power and install Sanon as prime minister. According to two Americans arrested in connection to the assassination, the original plan was to kidnap Moise. But the mission to kill Moise came from a former Haitian Justice Ministry official, Joseph Felix Badio, according to the Colombian police. It was unclear if Badio was himself directed by someone else further up the chain. On the governing front, Prime Minister Claude Joseph agreed to step down, making way for an interim government. That interim government would oversee the holding of elections. At the helm would be Ariel Henry, who would serve as prime minister, the very same person selected by Moise to replace Joseph just days before the assassination. Still in the Western Hemisphere, 6 weeks after the presidential election in Peru, Pedro Castillo, a member of the socialist left Free Peru Party, was officially proclaimed to be Peru's president-elect. Meanwhile, with the right-wing candidate Keiko Fujimori having lost the election, she would face an imminent corruption trial. Prosecutors were seeking a 30-year jail term against her. Castillo, a leftist trade unionist, would become Peru's fifth president in 3 years, following a cascade of corruption scandals that resulted in 3 different presidents having to step down in November 2020. Meanwhile, several other former presidents were either convicted of graft or facing corruption investigations. Moving across the world to the Middle East, Lebanon was facing dual crises, financial collapse, as well as political instability. The currency, the Lebanese pound, plummeted to a new low. Lebanese citizens were living under the poverty line, and there were shortages of crucial basic supplies from food to fuel. The economic strife, which was characterized by the World Bank as one of the worst ever. At the same time, Premier-designate Saad Hariri failed to form a government, plunging the country into uncharted waters with no one captaining the proverbial ship. The failure of Hariri to form a government was the result of a power struggle between Presidents with President Makal Ayoun. The only pathway out of the crisis appeared to be coming from Paris, where the former colonial power France was leading the international effort to rescue Lebanon from the abyss when an aid conference set for August 4th, 2021 was to be in place. The political abyss, however, was another matter entirely. As noted by United States Secretary of State Antony Blinken, Lebanon's politicians had squandered the last 9 months. Finally, the world was getting ready for the games of the 32nd Olympiad. After a year of delay due to the global pandemic, the 2020 Summer Olympics were on track to proceed from July 23rd to August 8th in the Japanese capital city of Tokyo. Medals will be awarded in over 300 events across 33 sports that themselves include 50 disciplines. The Olympic torch relay began in the Japanese city of Fukushima on March the 25th. There was a delay of a year, that was last year, and there was a delay of a year following the arrival of the Olympic flame in Japan from Greece in March 2020. The Olympic torch will arrive in the Olympic Stadium on the opening ceremony on July 23rd. You'll be able to find our coverage next week at from the opening ceremonies onward from the front page of our Country Watch website at www.countrywatch.com. Next week, I'll be covering the attempted assassination of the leader of Mali, protests in South Africa, developments related to the Iran nuclear deal. and of course, Olympic coverage. For more information about our political stories, we might read my weekly political intelligence briefing and my coronavirus report, both of which are accessible from the front page of the Country Watch website at www.countrywatch.com. Thank you for your time. Have a great day, and remember that we live in an interconnected world.